Hey everybody. So, as most of you probably know, Calgary and Detroit gave us a pretty good brawl the other night. And of course the media completely sensationalized it, blew it way out of proportion. And I was watching these idiots on Sportsnet talk about how I haven't seen anything like this in 20 years, or this reminds me of, the wild 80s and old-time hockey, and they're full of crap. They're completely sensationalizing it and blowing it out of proportion because that gets ratings, and that's what they want on TV is ratings. But in reality, it was a decent brawl, but it wasn't that great, and it's certainly been sooner since 20 years since we've seen something like that, and in fact we've seen a lot better brawls in the last few years than the one the other night. So they were completely full of crap. There's been much better stuff in recent history, and that's what I've just done. I've gone through, and I started with the 2010-2011 season and went through the present, and I picked the 10 best brawls in the NHL from that stretch of time. And let me tell you, Calgary and Detroit from the other night is not on the list, and quite frankly, wasn't even close to making the list. It was a decent brawl. It was cool to have the benches involved. That's something that you really don't see anymore, but it really wasn't that spectacular, and we've had much better brawls in the last, less than 10 years. I started with, 2010. So here we go. These are the 10 best brawls since the 2010-2011 season. And the first one, number 10, 2016, March 5th, 2016, Anaheim versus LA. 6:58 of the first period. After an icing, I believe, Kyle Clifford and Corey Perry come together, and then everyone else piles in. End up with everybody squared off. You get two actual fights on the play, with Ricard Raquel and Christopher Stieg being the main event. That obviously two non-fighters there end up having a very good fight, and then Andy Andreoff and Kevin Bieksa was the other fight. This was really the peak of the Anaheim versus LA rivalry, and that rivalry has just keeps getting better, and really I think has been the best rivalry of the last 3-4 years, and this was the peak of that rivalry. They absolutely went at it, and this was a fantastic brawl. So that makes it number 10 on the list. Again, this was pretty good. This was better than the Calgary versus Detroit brawl in my opinion, and this is only number 10 on the list. Number 9, another March 5th brawl, this one 2 years earlier, March 5th, 2014, Washington versus Philadelphia. At 11:59 of the first period, there were two fights on the play. These teams really went at it. Everybody piled in. It started with Tom Wilson and Luke Shen, and then Vinny LeCavalier and John Erskine also fought on the play, and Wayne Simmons jumped into the middle of that fight, somehow avoided a third man in. But this was a really fun brawl to watch, and this was a brawl that you knew was coming because of something that happened earlier in the season between these two teams, and the thing that happened earlier in the season is much higher up on this list. But this was real. I was watching this game live when it happened. I remember it very, very well. It was really fun to watch, and I don't know how Simmons avoided a third man in, but everybody piled in. Only two actual fights, but all 10 guys were involved. So that's number 9. Number 8, Philadelphia versus Pittsburgh from April 1st, 2012. This one I also was watching live when it happened. This was 2012, 2013, though around there was really the peak of the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh rivalry in modern times. I mean, every time these two teams met, it was an absolute war. And this game was no different. They really went at it. And at the third period, 18:57, so almost a minute left in the game, Joe Vitale nails Danny Briere with an open ice hit. Everybody piles in and jumps on. Now, there was only one official actual fight out of it. It was Derek Englund versus Wayne Simmons. But there was so much more going on. Braden Shen got absolutely mauled by Aaron Asham. There were other guys jumping on top of each other, but not actually getting fighting majors. The coaches, Tony Granato, who was an assistant coach with Pittsburgh at the time, and Peter Laviolette, who is the head coach of the Flyers, were standing on the benches screaming at each other. Claude Giroux and Zach Ronaldo almost came off the bench for Philadelphia. The benches got involved. This was a really fun brawl to watch, and at a time when it seemed like every game between Philly and Pittsburgh had something like this. This was really, really fun and something you could see coming from a mile away. This would lead on to that year. These two teams would face off in the first round of the playoffs, and it was one of the best playoff series that I can remember in recent memory. Just really, really fun to watch. So that's number 8. Despite being only one official fight, it was still really, really good. Number 7, Calgary and Vancouver from the playoffs. This was Game 2 of this playoff series, I believe, from 2015, April 17th, 2015. Really awesome. This was an awesome series. This was a coming out party for Michael Furlan. He was just destroying everything in sight. And these two teams, you could tell, absolutely hated each other. So at the third period of Game 2, at 18:43, there were a huge brawl in behind, I believe it was Vancouver's net. Everybody got involved, all 10 guys on the ice, but there were 3 fights on the play. It started with Matt Stajan and Brad Richardson, who were 2 kind of non-fighters. You don't see them fighting a lot. And then Derek Englund and Derek Dorsett fought 2 separate times on the same stoppage. It was absolutely awesome. They fought the first time, it wasn't great, then they separated. Then Dan Hamhuis got involved, I remember. He came in as like a third man in, but didn't actually fight. And then Dorsett and Englund came together again and fought for a second time. And it was just absolutely fantastic. Peak playoff brawl here. Like, this is what the playoffs were all about. These teams hated each other. This was a great playoff series, and this was a great brawl. Number 6, I think a lot of you will remember this very vividly. New Jersey Devils and New York Rangers on March 19th, 2012. They start the game with 3 fights. Right off the opening faceoff, 3 seconds in, they start the game with 3 fights. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head everyone who was involved. I know Stu Bickle, the tough defenseman who was on the Rangers at the time, took the faceoff again because the Rangers center at the time, I don't remember who it was, but he wasn't likely to fight. Bickle was, so he came in and took the face-off and fought Ryan Carter right off the opening draw. I know Prust fought. Brandon Prust and Mike Rupp were the other 2 Rangers who fought, and the 2 Devils were Cam Jansen and Eric Bolton. I don't remember the matchups. I believe it was Bolton versus Prust and Jansen versus Rupp, but I might have mixed those up. But I think that's what it was. But anyway, fantastic way to start the game. Division rivalry, these teams don't like each other, and this was really an awesome event. Number 5, we're into the top 5 now. Montreal versus Boston on February 9th, 2011. Third period, less than a minute to go, 4 fights. It started with Andrew Ference slashing Travis Moen's legs out from under him. They fight, and then everyone else piles in. This is peak Montreal versus Boston, one of the best rivalries in the NHL. Really, at this time, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, these teams really went at it every time they faced off, and it was a brawl all the time with these 2 teams, as it should be with Montreal and Boston. And this was probably the best brawl out of all of them. 4 fights. I remember Boston just dominating the fights and winning the game too. This was the year they went on to win the Stanley Cup. So as a Bruins fan, this was just a great time and great thing to see. Sean Thornton ragdolled Roman Hamrlik. Johnny Boychuk absolutely wrecked Yaroslav Spacek. Gregory Campbell bloodied Tom Pyatt. Like, Boston just destroyed them in all the fights. It was just awesome to see and really, really fun to watch. Number 4, I alluded to this earlier. This was the event earlier in the season that led to the first Philadelphia and Washington brawl I talked about. November 1st, 2013, third period of a blowout game. I think Philadelphia ended up losing this game 7-0. 5:31 of the third period, already getting blown out. There were 4 fights on the play. Started with a fight between Tom Wilson and Wayne Simmons, and then it ended up famously with Ray Emery versus Braden Holtby, which really wasn't even a fight. It was a mugging. Holtby didn't even take his gloves off and wanted nothing to do with it. Emery just absolutely jumped him and started pounding his face in. Obviously, when your goalie's getting beat up, everyone jumps in. We ended up with 3 more fights on the play. It was just a wild and chaotic scene, and absolutely one of the best brawls in recent memory, especially having the goaltenders involved. It was just absolutely awesome. So, one of my favorites of recent memory. Number 3, Calgary versus Vancouver. They make the list again. These teams absolutely hate each other. And on January 18th of 2014, they started the game with a full 5-on-5 line brawl. First period, 2 seconds in. I remember a lot of guys were involved, like Tom Sestito, Brian McGrath, and Kevin Bieksa. There were also some guys who normally don't fight as much involved, like Jason Garrison. But it ended up just being it started with, I think, just 2 fights, but then other guys got involved after. It ended up being a full 5-on-5 brawl. But what a fantastic way to start the game. Just really, really fun to watch. And really doesn't get any better than when all 5 guys go at it. The only thing missing was a goalie fight or the benches emptying, but that doesn't happen at all anymore. So doesn't really get much better than this, but it does. One of my favorite playoff series, one of the nastiest playoff series I can remember in recent memory, the 2013 playoff series between Montreal and Ottawa. Game 3, May 5th, 2013. Third period of a blowout game. Montreal was they're just absolutely getting it handed to them. They were getting absolutely destroyed. So 7:04 the third period. I remember this. I was watching this game live. The whole game was incredible. The whole game pretty much was a brawl, but the real line brawl happened in the third period. Ryan White, right off of face-off, takes a huge hack with his stick, like an axe, at the Ottawa's center's ankle. Jared Cowan comes in and starts throwing bombs, and the next thing you know, all 10 guys on the ice are fighting. Again, the only thing missing was the goaltenders, but that didn't happen. But there were 5 fights on the play. Everyone squared off, and I braided this ahead of the last one because of it's in the playoffs, and just the emotion involved was incredible. The building was absolutely nuts. I remember watching this game, and it was just one of my favorite games I've ever watched in the playoffs, at least that I can remember in recent memory. Just absolutely awesome. It's absolutely this for me is one of my favorite all-time brawls. Never mind just since 2010. And then the last one, I hope some of you will remember this. Pittsburgh versus New York from February 11th, 2011, and I just said the whole game. I'm not even picking one brawl. There were multiple line brawls in this game. 8 fights total in the game. Nowadays there are whole weeks where there's only 8 fights in the whole week of NHL games. Never mind just in one game. This was the first time these two teams met since Max Talbot hit, I believe it was Blake Como, with a clean hit, but it concussed Como. So the Islanders were really ticked off about that. Also, Brent Johnson and Rick DiPietro had a goalie fight in the last game, and Johnson one-punched DiPietro. breaking his like orbital bone or cheekbone or something. So the Islanders were really upset going into this game because of what happened the last time these teams met. So they just turned the game into an absolute, the whole game was a brawl pretty much. They just turned it into a gong show. And they ended up winning the game 9-3, which was also pretty funny that the Islanders won the game, because at the time the Islanders were one of the worst teams in the league and Pittsburgh was still, one of the best. But they absolutely handed it to them physically and on the scoreboard, and 8 fights in the game, multiple line brawls, including Michael Haley going after Brent Johnson, which you never see goalie versus player fights anymore, but you did this time. It was just absolutely wild. Easily the best brawl-filled game or best fight event of the last 10 years. Just absolutely awesome. So those are the 10 best brawls since the 2010-2011 season. Notice a lot of them happened around 2011, 2012. That was a really good time. For whatever reason, that was a really good time for brawls in the NHL. There would just seem to be a ton of them. And, that was as the enforcer era was winding down. So maybe that was like the big last hurrah. Although some of these brawls really didn't have enforcers involved, and a lot of them had players who still play today involved. So I don't know how much enforcers had to do with some of them. But so yeah, if you're a fan of brawls and fights, I greatly suggest rewatching some of these and looking some of these up. They were absolutely fantastic. The last couple years really hasn't given us much brawl-wise. Calgary versus Detroit from the other night was nowhere near making this list, and hopefully that we get some more action this year, and hopefully something happens this year that could possibly make this list. But so that's it for the last few years. Like, comment, share, subscribe, keep this channel growing. Follow on social media. Thank you guys very much for watching. Talk to you guys soon. Hope you enjoyed the video.